You wake up to the metallic sound of cutlery clinking against tin plates. Down below, where the light from the deck never reaches, the air is as thick as a poorly boiled turnip broth. The wood creaks, as if the ship itself were whispering ancient secrets. You are aboard the Titanic, but not on the glamorous side with golden staircases and crystal halls. You're where coal smoke meets the sickly sweet smell of oatmeal. Welcome to third class. The floor vibrates slightly with the engine, a constant hum, comforting like the buzz of an old refrigerator. Your feet, wrapped in rough wool socks, touch the damp cold of the floorboards. It's almost dinner time, or at least something that's been promoted to dinner for lack of better options. You walk through the corridor, long, narrow, filled with muffled voices, in dozens of languages. Irish families, hopeful Italians, quiet Scandinavians. All bear a look that mixes exhaustion with anticipation, like those who bet everything on a one-way ticket to the future. The third-class dining room is a modest place. Long, with fixed benches, lit by electric bulbs that flicker like sleepy eyes. The dishes are simple, deep, heavy. The food, ... Ah, the food. It's not made to impress, it's made to sustain. Bread, salted butter, mashed potatoes with skins, salted meat almost as tough as the benches. And of course, black tea, always black tea, because hot water can disguise almost anything. You sit next to a Norwegian man still trying to understand the fork system. He smiles with his eyes, since words don't do much good. The atmosphere is uncomfortably intimate, like eating lunch in a convent cafeteria. The children laugh loudly, the adults eat in silence. The soup, made of barley and courage, slips from the spoon as if it would rather be anywhere else. In the kitchen, which you'll never see, invisible men work with aprons, always damp. They chop, boil, serve, an almost military system, with human gears turning without pause. No one there cooks for love, they cook for survival. And even so, there is a strange poetry in that greasy chaos. Every baked loaf, every reheated broth, is a message that, no matter how temporary the crossing, there is still an attempt to maintain dignity on the plate. In first class, they say today's meal is filet mignon, with mushroom sauce and French wines. Down here, you have bread that's seen better days, and butter that vaguely smells of the pot. But no one complains. Or rather, they've learned that complaining is more tiring than accepting. You chew slowly. The bread is dense, like a metaphor for the immigrant's life. And as you chew, something crosses your mind. A vague, slippery thought, like smoke. Will anyone remember how we ate down here? Because the golden halls of first class will be photographed, reconstructed, immortalized in films. But these wooden benches, these forgettable broths, these interrupted meals, all of it will vanish like steam over the Atlantic. You look around and realize everyone is trying to seem normal, pretending this is just another dinner. That they're not on a giant piece of metal crossing an icy sea toward the unknown. That the sour butter isn't a bad omen. The fork slips from a sweaty hand. The soup is cold. And still, this is what there is. Maybe that's why, if someone someday hears this story, maybe you, lying there, eyes half closed, it might be good to remember that the Titanic wasn't just champagne and waltzes. It was also stale bread and Russian potatoes, served with a trembling spoon at a communal table. And if all this makes sense, if this dive into the forgotten everyday makes you want to know more, well, maybe it's a good time to remember to leave your little mark here. They say, commenting helps not to forget. And subscribing is like securing a second ticket. This time, one way 2 more forgotten stories. Now, the soup is cold, and the ship continues its course. Tomorrow, maybe there'll be fish. Or not, no one knows for sure. You wake up again. Or maybe you never really slept. The vegetable fiber mattress doesn't exactly encourage ambitious dreams. Even so, the sound of the ship in motion is a kind of metallic lullaby. And the creaking of the hull has something comforting about it, like an old tree cracking under the wind. You get up and take a deep breath. The smell is the same: damp wood, coal, humanity. The indistinct aroma of hundreds of lives sharing the same corridor. Welcome to third class. Or, for the more formal, steerage. The word comes from nautical English, referring to the lower part of ships where steering equipment was stored. A place originally made for cargo and goods. And later, of course, for people who couldn't afford not to be treated like cargo. But on the Titanic, the concept was dressed up. White Star Line, the company that owned the ship, wanted to change that image. Third class here was, let's say, a decorated version of reality. Still no luxury, but with a minimum level of comfort so it wouldn't seem cruel. The dormitories were shared, true, but there were sinks with running water, towels, even soap, in some cases, a revolutionary advancement. Single men stayed at one end of the ship, families, and single women at the other. The walls, as thin as excuses. But there were beds, and there were windows. Small, round, with a view of the liquid eternity. Which, let's face it, is more than many European trains offered at the time. Most third-class passengers came from Ireland, Scandinavia, Italy. They were seeking work, land, promises. They came with modest bags and inflated hopes. They fled wars, famines, mothers-in-law. Some came by faith, others by sheer stubbornness. And they all ended up here, sitting on fixed benches, drinking black tea, and trying not to think about the immensity around them. Food was included in the fare, an unexpected luxury by the standards of the time. 3 meals a day. Not good, but consistent. A detail that, for many, was reason enough to board. Still, even with these basic comforts, third class was a constant reminder of who you were in the world. There were doors you couldn't pass through. Stairs that led to places where your smell would be considered offensive. Guards with empty expressions, as if they were part of the furniture. The ship was a floating social metaphor. The higher you were, the more freedom you had. And even so, Titanic's third class was praised by many. Compared to other ships of the time, it was almost a floating hotel. Many passengers wrote letters saying they had never eaten so much, that they slept better there than in the homes they were born in. Of course, the letters were sent before the iceberg. In the midst of all this, there's something curious. The official records of third class are sparse. Fragmented, incomplete lists, vague descriptions, ship blueprints that contradict each other. Historians still debate how many people exactly were on board, or how the cabins were distributed. Academic uncertainty hangs like a light fog, made of torn papers and lost files. What we do know for sure is that, for every first-class passenger, there were more than 2 in third class. They formed the backbone of the ship, though treated like appendages. They were the invisible ones, and perhaps for that very reason, the most human of all. You walk to the end of the corridor, where the ceiling seems to drop a few inches. There, between one pipe and another, someone has hung a sock to dry. And for some reason, that sock, old, holy, trembling in the steam, moves you more than any golden chandelier in first class. That's what third class is. A collection of small gestures. A world of survival arranged in iron beds. Where every spoonful of porridge tastes like persistence. Where dinner might be a watery soup, ... but also a thread of warm dignity, sliding down your throat. The soup, by the way, comes with potatoes today. A luxury. You don't see it. No one does. The third-class kitchen is an ethereal entity, like a rumor, that materializes in the form of dark bread and translucent soup. The food appears, lukewarm and resigned, as if it had served itself, and you eat. Because eating is what you do when there's not much to choose from. But somewhere, between the hot pipes and coal stores, there's a door with a half-faded inscription. Behind it, sweaty men work in dirty aprons, and with pragmatic stares. Cooks, not chefs, not gourmets, just operators of sustenance. The third-class kitchen brigade was a robust and invisible gear, made up of kitchen hands, vegetable choppers, fire watchers, and specialists in turning meat with a single fork, always the same fork. They weren't there for glory, nor for the love of gastronomy. They were there because someone had to make sure more than 700 mouths had something to chew 3 times a day. They were the ghosts of floating nutrition. Their names barely appear in the records, and the few that remain are truncated, misspelled, or lost in passenger lists. Historians still debate who coordinated the third-class kitchen crew, a persistent uncertainty that hangs like the smell of raw onion in the air. The logistics were Herculean. The Titanic carried tons of food, over 40,000 eggs, nearly 40 tons of potatoes, and enough meat to feed a small army. The distribution to the different classes was done with calculated precision. The first and second-class kitchens had their own chefs, prep rooms, and delicate dishware. The third class had big pots and a lot of faith. It was a war kitchen. Everything had to be done in bulk, with limited resources. There was no room for frills. The meat came salted, the milk was powdered or evaporated. The vegetables cooked until they lost all identity. The bread was baked in large batches, at dawn, by bakers who knew how to sleep standing up. One of them, according to an unconfirmed account, baked while singing a Neapolitan song about loss and pots. Communication between decks was handled by tired runners, a rudimentary system of trays, buckets, and calloused hands. The food came out in cauldrons, and someone was responsible for not tripping with them on the way to the dining rooms, a system that relied more on luck than engineering. What's most intriguing is that there is no clear floor plan of the third-class kitchen. Many scholars believe it was integrated with the second-class kitchen, separated only by a narrow corridor. Others say it was separate, with its own coal stove. A map recovered from the Belfast shipyard suggests a third theory, that there were satellite kitchens near the dining rooms, to speed up service. But how can we be sure? The truth, like the broth, was lost in the depths. What is known is that those who cooked for third class were very low in the ship's culinary hierarchy. It was the kind of job that made first-class waiters pretend not to see. Even so, without them, the entire ship would collapse in silent protest. The porridge was the invisible cement of coexistence, and there was pride, even there. A kitchen helper, whose diary was found years later in an attic in Cornwall, wrote that his greatest achievement was making a whole batch of barley soup without letting it stick to the bottom of the pot. It was like conducting an orchestra, he said, but with a turnip smell. You, sitting there with your tin spoon, may never know these names. But in every warm sip, there's an invisible signature. A promise that even in the darkness of the lower decks, someone still cares about keeping the water boiling. You sit at the table, if you can call that wooden bench bolted to the floor a chair, and that slightly warped board a table. Around you, the sounds of chewing, sighs, a few timid laughs, the kind of laughter that slips out when the soup isn't as bad as it was yesterday. Dinner has arrived, and you look at it like someone looks at an acquaintance they've lost touch with a mix of distrust and gratitude. Tonight, there's salted meat, maybe pork, maybe beef cured until it resembles wood seasoned with sea breeze. The texture is firm, but it doesn't fall apart. The flavor is like a secret not worth revealing. It comes with potatoes. Always potatoes. Boiled, mashed. Sometimes whole potatoes are the constant that unites immigrants of all nationalities. If there's a universal republic of the stomach, its flag is made of tubers. The bread is dark, rustic, with a hard crust and dense crumb, ideal for dipping into the barley soup, which arrives steaming and slightly gray. Third-class soup doesn't want to be remembered. It is water with ambitions. Scattered grains, dissolved vegetables, maybe a piece of carrot that survived the shipwreck of texture. But it's hot, and hot, in this context, is almost the same as good. Next to it, a slice of cheese, or something close to it. Apparently cheddar, but the kind of cheddar that doesn't want to commit. The black tea comes in metal mugs that warm your fingers, a detail no one mentions, but it makes a difference. There's also butter, when luck allows, and plum jam, on festive occasions. No one expects dessert. Sugar is a luxury. Sometimes, rice pudding appears. Almost never. Curiously, there was variety. The third-class menu changed daily, within reason. Fig pudding, rice soup, meatballs, even boiled fish on brave days. The food was simple, but designed to provide minimum sustenance with dignity. The ship, after all, had a reputation to uphold. Even if you were eating in a compartment that smelled faintly of sea, rust, and wet socks. The official menu found after the disaster lists dishes like rice soup, steak with onion sauce, fresh bread, and stewed fruit. It's a surprisingly optimistic view of what actually arrived at the table, especially considering reports describing the milk as slightly greenish, and the fish as enthusiastically aromatic. But for many passengers, it was a banquet. There was plenty, which was more than could be said, of the kitchens they left behind in rural Ireland, the mountains of Italy, or Slavic villages. A Norwegian boy supposedly said, according to a report from the newspaper, Bergens Tidende, that he'd never eaten so well, not even at Christmas. Of course, that may have been a reporter's invention. Modern historians doubt the authenticity of the account. Uncertainty hangs once again, like poorly whipped cream over lukewarm jam. What is certain, however, is that third-class dinner was functional. It fed bodies in transition. It didn't seduce, didn't move, but it filled. It was the antithesis of the gourmet experience in first class, where meals came with French names and silverware. Here, the name of the dish was irrelevant. What mattered was whether you could get seconds. And there was one detail. The bread might be hard, but it was shared. Third-class dining rooms promoted a silent communion. No one there cared about presentation. What mattered was the warmth, the spoon, the next bite, because, in the end, third-class dinner was the last ritual before sleep or hope. You spread butter on the bread with the tip of your fork. The soup is still warm. The ship sways slightly, and for a moment, everything feels in order. Almost, domestic. Almost, you hold the spoon firmly. Not out of fear someone might steal it. Here crime is limited to nudges for bench space, but because the ship sways, gently, as if an invisible hand were caressing the hull from below. A gentle sway, almost elegant, but still enough for your soup to make tiny waves, as if rehearsing a discreet mutiny. Eating on the Titanic, in third class, is an exercise in balance. The table vibrates. The tea mug slides 2 centimeters to the right, and then returns, obedient. The spoon trembles on the path between bowl and mouth. Each bite is a silent negotiation between gravity and dignity. The sound of dinner isn't really a sound. It's a timid orchestra. Cutlery clinking against metal, muffled footsteps of cooks, an isolated child's hiccup, the distant chime of finer dishes being washed on some unreachable deck, and deep beneath it all, the constant hum of the engine. Like a monk reciting a mantra, endlessly, emotionlessly. It's the sound of crossing the ocean. The smell is ... Layered. The top, soup, steam, and tea. The middle, damp clothes, old leather, a hint of brine. The most persistent, pure humanity, fermented in lower decks. It's not exactly bad. It's honest. Like stepping into a greenhouse where hope and poorly washed onions are grown. The lighting doesn't help much. Electric lamps, a novelty of the time, illuminate the room as if embarrassed to shine too brightly. The yellow light casts soft shadows on faces. Everyone looks a little paler, a little more dreamy, and the eyes shine as if each spoonful were a rehearsal for the future. You sit with a group of strangers. A Polish mother with 2 daughters in tight braids. A Swedish lad, chewing as if meditating. A Scottish lady who brought her own cloth napkin, embroidered with initials no one recognizes. Everyone eats in polite silence. Not an awkward silence, a silence of focus, Eating demands attention. Miss time, a bite, and soup hits the collar. Then comes the magic moment, the accidental conversation. A comment about the tea, a laugh that escapes unintentionally. The trade of a piece of bread for a compliment on a crocheted handkerchief. Food, even modest, has this ancestral power to open cracks in formality, to turn strangers into temporary neighbors. You think about the difference between eating and feeding. Here, you eat quickly and feed with resignation. But there's something more. A kind of resistance embedded in the act of sitting, eating, and smiling, even when everything around you sways. Eating here is also a political act, a manifesto of continuity. Sometimes the ship rocks harder, someone spills tea. Everyone chuckles, discreetly. Laughter is a safety valve. There are no spare napkins. A sleeve will do, and life goes on. Interestingly, there are records of third-class passengers saying they felt less seasick than expected. Maybe it was the heavy bread anchoring their stomachs. Maybe it was instinct. Or perhaps just a statistical fluke. Uncertainty floats like potato steam. You finish your plate with a final strategic spoonful, leaning your body in sync with the ship. Your body has already adjusted to the motion, as if dancing a slow waltz with the ocean. The stomach is nearly full. The soul, gently warmed. Outside, the dark sea stretches like a silent promise. But inside, under yellow light, among steam and bread, everything feels, for a brief moment, bearable, almost cozy. You stare at the soup, the same as yesterday, maybe. Or a close cousin of the one from the day before. It's hard to tell. But something about it starts to feel like more than just nutritional liquid. It feels like a statement of intent. On the Titanic, nothing is just what it is. Not even boiled barley. Third-class food isn't neutral. No food is. Every dish that reaches the table carries more than potatoes and salt. It carries a message about your place in the world. Here, for instance, the porridge is a reminder of restraint. The salted meat, an emblem of effort. The dark bread, an edible metaphor for the hardships of the journey, both literal and symbolic. Meanwhile, in first class, the menu reads like a 9-chapter novel. Fresh oysters, smoked salmon with muslin sauce, lyonnaise chicken, asparagus, artistic jellies. And to finish, peaches and jelly, served in silver goblets that gleamed like promises. There, every dish is a spectacle, prestige, an affirmation of belonging. Eating well isn't just pleasure, it's a performance of power. Down here, there are no presentations, no exotic sauces or French names. There's substance and simplicity. An honest bread that promises no more than it delivers. A tea that warms without trying to impress. And, curiously, some prefer that. Third-class food, despite everything, is less theatrical, more sincere. Like a firm handshake. Like a practical grandmother who feeds you first, asks questions later. But why such a difference? Because the ship is a social microcosm. A floating theater where the dishes served reveal more than the dialogues. White Star Line knew this. Every first-class meal was carefully planned to reflect status and sophistication. After all, they were competing with other transatlantic companies for the global elite. Third class, well, it just had to keep its passengers alive and minimally satisfied. Even so, there were attempts to dress up the narrative. The company proudly stated that third-class food was superior to second-rate hotels in England. A bold claim, with a strong scent of marketing. There are conflicting reports. Some passengers remember plentiful and tasty meals. Others, lukewarm and bland plates. History, once again, bends under the weight of perspective. The exact truth was lost, perhaps drowned, along with the tin cutlery. And there was more than taste at stake. There was ideology. The dishes chosen for third class avoided ingredients that were too exotic. They wanted to prevent cultural conflicts among passengers of different origins. Nothing too spicy. No pork for Muslims. No beef for Hindus. A sparse, almost neutral menu, the lowest common denominator among languages, beliefs, and sensitive stomachs. But of course, neutrality is also a choice. By standardizing, a bit of each person's identity was erased. The soup was universal, but also anonymous. It was comfort, but also control. You dipped the bread in the edge of the plate, watching the crumbs dissolve like certainties in academic debates. You think that maybe this dinner says more about the world than the ship's architecture. Because what is eaten reveals what is expected of the one who eats. And here, what's expected is resilience. Third-class food, then, is more than nutrition. It's a symbol. A reminder that the future won't come easy, but it will come. A dish that doesn't please the eyes, but supports the legs. And, if chewed with patience, even comforts. Outside, the sea remains indifferent. But inside, between sips of tea and silent soups, you chew the world, or at least the part of it that was left for you. You look at the plate today. There's fish, or something that self-identifies as fish. It has the slightly challenging texture of food cooked by sheer insistence. But before you bring the fork to your mouth, a voice whispers from the next table, "Don't eat the skin. It glows in the dark." The laugh is low, conspiratorial. A recurring joke among third-class passengers, where humor is the only real seasoning. Not everything served on the Titanic made it into the books. There are gaps in the menu. Dishes that no one wrote down, recipes that disappeared, flavors that exist only in the memory of those who chewed in silence. Some of those forgotten recipes are nearly legend. One of them is the infamous suet pancake, made with leftover beef fat, flour, and in the bolder versions, molasses. Supposedly served at third-class breakfasts, its existence is debated by culinary historians. There's no official record. Just oral accounts, and a fragmentary recipe discovered in a notebook that survived salt water. Other foods were forbidden, not by law, but by convention. Too much garlic, for instance. It was considered coarse, improper for enclosed spaces. Exotic fruits like avocado or mango were not just rare, they were viewed with suspicion. As if eating something so wet and soft were a kind of heresy against the standard texture of the European diet. Hard, salty, and tough. There was also a certain taboo around overly spiced food. White Star Line, fearing gastrointestinal disturbances of cultural origin, preferred to keep third-class seasoning at almost homeopathic levels. The result, a dining hall with a neutral odor, moderate palate, and a quiet longing for black pepper. But there were rebels. It's said that a passenger from Calabria brought a vial of peperoncino hidden in the hem of her skirt. And that, in a silent midnight, she spiced the porridge with tears of fire. The result was immediate: sweat, laughter, and a novel sense of culinary pleasure. The vial disappeared the next day. Never found coincidence or suppression. Academia still debates. Another curious case involves a sailor from the crew, who, according to an apocryphal letter sent by an Austrian passenger, only ate raw onions. They say he bit into them like apples, eyes watering and wearing an indecipherable smile. Some thought it was superstition, others, tradition. Some say he survived the shipwreck, floating while clinging to a sack of onions. A story too delicious to be true. Among the documents recovered after the disaster, few mention the actual flavors of third-class food. Most speak of textures, temperatures, quantities, but taste, that was lost. There is a preserved original menu that lists fig pudding as dessert. But what was that pudding? Was it sweet? Was it warm? Was it good? No one knows for sure. And since no one seems to agree, imagination is left to season the story. It's strange to think that in such a monumental ship, some of the biggest mysteries lie in the simplest plate. Rivets and propeller design aren't debated with the same passion as whether or not there was corn porridge on Tuesday. You finish the fish, it doesn't glow. Maybe because today, that's all it is, fish. But you catch yourself thinking about the recipes that were lost, the sauces that never arrived, the spices left behind in the homeland. And there's something profoundly human in that emptiness, that absence of flavor that echoes like an ancient call, like a dish never served, but everyone remembers. The air that night tastes different. It's still the same metallic steam, the same persistent aroma of barley, bread, and moderately domesticated sweat. But there's a slight vibration in the atmosphere, something subtle, like a tide shift in collective mood. The third-class kitchen is noisier. Pots clink with a rhythmic, almost anxious frequency. Maybe it's just Monday, maybe not. Dinner arrived early. The electric light flickered less than usual. The benches were fuller. The soup, surprisingly, came hot. And, believe it or not, it had carrot. Real carrot. In pieces that still resembled carrot, not just the idea of it. Beside it, meatballs, or more precisely, compacted fragments of meat with flour, salt, and the blessing of thermal stability. Someone says it's because there'll be an inspection tomorrow. Someone else says it's because a new batch of potatoes arrived. And a third voice, half laughing, half serious, murmurs, or because this is the last full night we'll see. Silence, then laughter. Laughing is still allowed. The third-class supper on the night of April 14th, 1912, was as simple as it was symbolic. The records, fragile as wet paper napkins, indicate that rice and onion soup was served, with fresh bread, butter, and hard cheese. Some accounts mention semolina pudding with raisins, but there's no consensus. Uncertainty hangs as always, in the form of steam and speculation. Families ate together. Many were excited about nearing their destination, America. Land of promises and, supposedly, soft bread. The children fell asleep with full bellies. The adults shared stories. No one noticed the growing cold outside. The ship sped forward, ignoring the whisper of the stars. On the upper deck, gentlemen ordered brandy. Down here, people simply asked for another slice of bread. It's strange to think that this was the last dinner for so many lives. There's no dramatization, just a quiet realization. The meals weren't interrupted by alarm. No soup was dropped in shock. Everything happened as always. Chewing was slow. Tea was served. Plates were stacked. Some lingered in conversation. Others went straight to sleep. The ship struck the iceberg at 11:40 p.m., a muffled sound, described by witnesses as a long scrape. A tremor in the floor, like dragging a heavy table over wet gravel. Below, the more attentive felt the impact. But many kept sleeping, dreaming of the same dishes they had eaten that night. Some awoke with water seeping through cracks. Others, with screams. But in that hour between dinner and ice, between the last spoonful and the beginning of the end, the world was still stable. Life was still contained in bowls of soup and restrained laughter. It's impossible to know exactly what each person ate. The records are partial. The menus found were in first-class areas. Third-class meals were less documented, less photographed, less remembered. Even so, they happened. They were served with haste, with care, with exhaustion. They were eaten with appetite, with hope, with distraction. And you, in this moment, your stomach slightly comforted by this story, might realize what makes a supper historic isn't the food itself. It's what comes after. It's what it precedes. It's what it silently tries to ward off. You rise from the table. The soup was good. The tea still burns the palm of your hand. The floor feels steadier than it is. And for a moment, you almost believe the future is certain. Almost. You walk down a silent corridor. The ship no longer sings as it once did. The engine still hums, but there's a new tension in the air, a sort of prolonged pause between one spoonful and the next. It's the day after, or what's left of it. And in third class, the tables are empty. Not for lack of hunger, but for absence of routine. The meals have stopped. The third-class kitchen is locked, or perhaps abandoned. No one chops onions anymore. No one stirs the porridge. The smell of warm bread has been replaced by the metallic odor of cold water. And yet, the memories of the food remain alive, clinging to soaked clothes, stuck in the back of the throat. After the sinking, survivor accounts helped reconstruct what was eaten, how it was served, what was left on the plate. But these testimonies are fragmentary, imprecise, laden with emotion. An Irish woman clearly remembered a piece of bread with plum jam, so sweet it felt like a gift. A young Swede spoke of a meatball that was still warm when the ship stopped. An Italian child, years later, recalled the smell of black tea, like my mother's lap. These are edible memories, dishes that live longer in memory than in archives. And, curiously, each memory is different. The same porridge was described as thick and delicious by some, and as pieces of wet paper by others. The rice soup, sometimes comforting, sometimes unbearable. The puddings, of mysterious texture and flavor, varying with the narrator's mood. This discrepancy reveals more than just imprecision. It shows how food is subjective, emotional, intimate. In extreme situations, taste becomes a record of survival. What you ate might become the last detail that makes sense, and even that fades with time. Many third-class dishes were never precisely documented. There is no photo of the soup, no recipe for the porridge, no sample of the cheese. Everything was lost in the water or to historical neglect. The elite had their menus recovered, their suppers reenacted, their dinnerware restored in museums. Third class was left with oral memory, with uncertainty. The history of its food is made of echoes and speculation. Still, something persists, a kind of gastronomic myth. The barley soup became a symbol of resilience. The hard bread, an emblem of humility. The black tea, a ritual of continuity. These are not refined dishes, but they are eternal. Not for culinary merit, but for context. Historians try to recreate these meals based on accounts. Themed restaurants have served third-class menus with pride. But something is always missing. A missing spice. A hum of the engine. A tired gaze at the table. The real food of the Titanic cannot be replicated, because it was less about the plate and more about the moment. You remember one spoon in particular, iron, bent, with a scratched handle. It was your spoon during the crossing, and in a way, it was also a companion. A piece of metal that tasted everything with you. A symbol as relevant as any golden artwork on the upper deck. In the absence of precise records, what remain are the stories. And stories, as we know, are more nourishing than they seem. You descend an imaginary staircase. Step by step, you dive into time. The light fades, the temperature drops. Around you, a dense silence, the kind only deep water knows how to keep. We are now at the bottom of the North Atlantic, 4,000 meters deep. Amid rust, mud, and legends, rests the Titanic, or at least, what's left of it. For decades, the wreck lay untouched, cradled by cold currents and time that spares not even myths. And then, one day, the submarines arrived. The mechanical eyes of the 20th century. The past, frozen in silence, began to be photographed, filmed, analyzed. Every plate, every fork, every menu fragment became a sacred relic, especially those from first class. But what about third class? What remains? Curiously, iron cutlery was found. Thick ceramic bowls, tin mugs. In some cases, plates still stacked, as if the kitchen had been interrupted mid-shift. There are images showing spoons covered in sediment, resting with the dignity of a submerged sculpture. Objects without names, but with stories embedded. Some menus were recovered, wet, torn, illegible. Most come from first and second class, where the paper was better, the leather folders more durable, and the documents more valued. Third-class menus, when they appear, emerge as fragile traces. A yellowed sheet with faded words. A menu scribbled in a passenger's notebook. Perhaps real, perhaps reconstructed. In museums around the world, You can find these pieces: cracked plates, bent forks, tray fragments. Items that once belonged to ordinary routines, now displayed in lit cases, surrounded by explanatory plaques. Spoon, iron, 1912. But for the one who held that spoon, it was much more than an object. It was a bridge between hunger and hope. Researchers try to preserve what they can, but the ocean is relentless. Time turns everything into rust and silence. The famous rusticles, colonies of bacteria that devoured the whole, also consume what was left at the table. History, like the third-class porridge, slowly dissolves. And, as always, there are debates. Some relics are contested. There's controversy over the origin of specific utensils, the authenticity of certain dishes found in exhibits. A burned tray fragment spawned for academic theses, and no definitive conclusion. Uncertainty hangs, as always, with elegance. Still, there's something moving in seeing these surviving objects. A simple, cracked plate may say more about the Titanic than any film. Because it doesn't tell the story of glamour, but of the everyday. Of the interrupted dinner, of the shared bread, of tea served in haste. You observe a spoon in some museum. It's there, motionless, yet seems to contain movement. You can almost hear the sound of it tapping against a mug. Almost feel the warmth of the steam rising through your fingers. And for a moment, third class, that forgotten part of the ship, breathes again. To preserve what was eaten is to preserve what was lived. Even if it lasted only a few days. Even if history was written from the top, in golden ink. The bottom of the ship had its chronicles too. You just had to listen closely. Or chew slowly. You're seated, but now in a movie theater chair. The lights go out. The screen glows. And there it is, the Titanic, in all its digital glory. Dramatized waves, stylized smoke, hair impeccably tousled by the wind, and of course food. Always food. But something feels, off. Or rather beautified. In the films especially, that 1997 one, you definitely know Titanic's food becomes spectacle. In first class, dinner is a ballet of cutlery and sharp dialogue. Waiters parade dishes as if carrying small works of art. Consomme Olga. Duck with my data sauce. Herby crustegi saumon. All served with such shine, you can almost smell the production budget. But third class, third class on screen is folkloric. It's shown as a rustic party, where everyone dances on tables, drinks dark beer, and sings in various accents. A well-choreographed folklore, with rosy-cheeked people eating bread and potatoes, with Broadway musical-level enthusiasm. Food becomes a prop, soup, a backdrop, bread, choreography. Rarely is the reality shown, the silence of the dining rooms, the ship's sway, the lukewarm porridge, because that, let's face it, doesn't make ratings. Hollywood needs contrasts. First class sparkles, third class vibrates, both dramatized to the extreme. The middle ground, where most humanity actually lived, rarely gets screen time, and it's not just films. Documentaries, series, exhibits also make choices. Third class soup is filmed with dramatic lighting. The hard bread becomes a symbol of resilience. Barley, a silent heroine. There's an almost touching attempt to assign epic meaning to modest dishes. But not everything is fiction. Some films and series base their menus on real documents. The famous menu from First Class's Last Night was replicated with near-religious precision. The third-class menu, however, was adapted with creative liberty. Potato and onion soup turned into root stew, and semolina pudding gained a broilered sugar topping, a sweetness that never made it aboard. Filmmakers justify these changes as poetic license, and maybe they're right. After all, cinema is dramatized memory. But when it comes to food, memory is already naturally dramatic. You don't remember the bread as it was, but how it made you feel. And the movies only need to amplify that with a widescreen lens and orchestral score. There is, however, a curious detail. Behind the scenes, third-class food is often made for real. Prepared with historical ingredients, replicating approximate recipes, and in many cases, actors really eat during rehearsals. There are reports of extras chewing porridge for the 8th time in the same take, reflecting, "This is exactly as bland as it looks." Titanic's food in cinema is a selective sensory reconstruction. What serves the narrative gets shown. Porridge becomes a symbol, bread becomes folklore, tea becomes romance, and soup, ... Well, it's still soup. Just filmed from below, with a spoon diving slowly in slow motion. You find yourself wondering, will a film ever show third-class dinner as it really was? Quiet, lukewarm, shared, without metaphors, without gloss, without a soundtrack. Maybe not. Maybe realism is too early, or too late. For now, what we have are recreations, representations, and the eternal question, did that soup really have carrot? You close your eyes. For a moment, you hear the distant sound of cutlery clinking against plates. But the dining room is empty. You're alone, or almost. There's a soft echo of footsteps coming from nowhere, a faint scent of freshly brewed black tea, and a subtle chill down your neck. It's not cold, it's condensed memory. Welcome to the spectral side of history. Yes, the Titanic has its ghosts, but we're not talking about the classic apparitions. Ladies in white, down the corridors, pale sailors staring at the horizon, bells ringing by themselves. Here we speak of another kind of specter, the ghosts of food. Let's start with the strangest, the living kitchen. In Belfast, where the Titanic was built, there are reports that replicas of the third-class kitchen in museums emit inexplicable sounds after closing, pots clanging, water bubbling, the high-pitched sound of a spoon stirring in a mug. Staff insist there's no ambient sound system, and the night guard, a cheerful man with zero tolerance for scares, swore he once smelled soup, and no stove had been lit. In Las Vegas, a replica of the third-class dining room included an immersive experience with audio and scent, but visitors began reporting visions of a man in a dirty apron carrying a pot, always at the same time, 8:13 p.m., the catch. No actor was assigned to that section, and the pot, when it slid by, cast no shadow. Stranger still is the case of a themed restaurant in Southampton that recreated the third-class menu. The manager reported that for weeks, pieces of bread were found out of place in the morning, as if someone had taken a bite and put it back. Once porridge disappeared from the counter before being served, the spoon was on the floor. No alarm went off. Some attribute these phenomena to residual memory. They say places and objects retain the energy of intense routines, and few routines were as concentrated as feeding hundreds of hungry passengers on a doomed ship. Food was more than nourishment. It was ritual, rhythm, repetition, and perhaps, for that reason, it continues to echo in loop, even without stomachs to fill. There are also the narrative culinary ghosts, stories told and retold about recipes no one can quite remake. The suet pancake, burned in a specific corner of the skillet. The tea that tasted faintly of an unidentified herb. Maybe mint, maybe misfortune. The barley pudding said to have put a child to sleep before the sinking, and she never woke again. Each dish gains an emotional weight that defies both palate and logic. A non-academic theory, popular among tour guides, claims that third-class ghosts don't haunt out of revenge, but out of continuity. They simply keep serving, keep eating, keep repeating the interrupted dinner. An eternity of floating suppers, between silence and steam. And there's something poetically fair in that. History often overlooked these dishes, these cooks, these tin utensils. But the ghosts, if they exist, ignore no one. They serve everyone, including you, who now share the invisible soup in the dining room that exists only in memory. You hear it again, a clink, quick, sharp, familiar. The spoon against the edge of the bowl. and a faint smell of freshly baked bread. But there's no more bread, only stories. Imagine, you enter the third-class dining hall. The door creaks. The air is warm, heavy with steam and murmurs. A distant sound of clanging pots cradles the collective breath. You sit, not because you want to, but because it's time. The food has arrived. First, the bread, served in heavy baskets, the kind that doesn't budge, even with the ship's sway. You pick a slice. The crust is hard as a politician's promises, but the inside is somehow comforting. It smells of yeast and persistence. You spread a bit of butter, cold, firm, with the texture of church candles. It doesn't spread, it refuses, but you persist. Then comes the soup. A tin bowl, the contents steaming like winter fog. It's rice soup, with onion fragments and a vague trace of salt. You look at it like you would a riddle, and then, slowly, you bring the spoon to your mouth. The soup is warm, almost tasty. Not because of the ingredients, but because your stomach already knows this is the best part of the day. The soup goes down slowly, unhurried, as if saying, "We're still here." Next, meatballs. Small, brown, with crispy edges and surprisingly soft centers. You bite. It's real meat, mixed with flour, onion, and maybe a hint of pepper. The kind of meatball that never appears in books but sustains personal revolutions. With the meatballs, boiled potatoes, bland maybe, but the texture is just right. You press with your fork, and it falls apart like old memories. You add a pinch of salt. Everything improves with salt, even history. A boy next to you offers cheese. It's hard, firm, with a smell that hovers between farm and cellar. You accept, you chew. The texture fights your teeth, but the flavor rewards. A dry taste of a past, unpasteurized, authentic, without knowing it. And then comes dessert. Yes, there is dessert. Semolina pudding with raisins. The spoon sinks easily. The texture is like an unexpected hug, sweet enough to remind you sugar exists. You chew slowly. The raisin, resilient, stares back at you. Meanwhile, the room breathes. The light flickers once. Someone sneezes, a child spills tea, and no one complains. You drink yours carefully. The black tea, strong, is the epilogue of the meal. Hot enough to warm the chest. Bitter enough to keep reality close. You observe the faces around you. Each one chews in their own way. There is silence, but not solitude. A rhythm to the chewing, like a collective rite. A ritual of discreet survival. Each spoonful is a small vote of confidence in tomorrow. And as you finish your tea, you look at the mug. It has no shine, no handle, but it holds warmth. Like everything around here. You finish, you rise, and as you leave, you take no plate, no cutlery. Only a feeling that you've eaten what one eats when the world is still a promise. When the destination is uncertain, but dinner is assured. And if, by chance, you dream tonight of hard bread and warm soup, know this, you were there. You wake up, or at least you think you do. There's a thick silence around you. The kind that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something older, reflection, and maybe that's exactly it. The moment when you look back at everything you ate, smelled and chewed, aboard this ship that never leaves the collective memory. Because the Titanic's menu isn't just a list of foods, it's a social map, an X-ray of class, of hope, of limits. In every third-class dish, there was a reminder of who you were. In every absence of dessert, a subtle note of hierarchy. The simple pudding said, "You've made it this far, but the feast has yet to be served." And curiously, that's what makes it so fascinating. The food served on the Titanic is the meeting point between the old world and the new. A last dinner between European tradition and industrial modernity. The ingredients were humble: potato, barley, salted meat, dark bread. But they were also resilient, transportably, familiar to many peoples. a transatlantic menu, a farewell buffet to the continent. What have we learned then? We've learned that food is not neutral, that every choice, even not serving carrots, says something about the historical moment, that even porridge has context, that bread with butter is a political gesture, that black tea is liquid resistance. We've learned that the Titanic was less a ship and more a floating performance of society. And that food was the silent script, written in spoons, crumbs, and lukewarm soups. A script where the lines didn't come from the stage, but from the back table, where the audience ate while waiting for something to happen. And ironically, it did. We've learned that taste is memory. That we don't know for sure if the fig pudding was good, but we remember it was the last for some. That there's something moving in a simple dish served before the end. And at the end, sometimes, tastes like stale bread. We've learned that silence at the table says as much as conversation. That third-class meals were less about pleasure and more about persistence. And yet, there were moments of lightness. A sip of tea, a laugh between bites, a whispered thank you with an accent. And perhaps most importantly, we've learned that history loves shiny plates and golden menus, but the truth lives in the hidden dining rooms. That the real narrative isn't in the grand halls, but in the steamy kitchens, in the nameless cooks, in the dishes that didn't make it into the movies. Today, looking at the remnants of the Titanic, it's easy to be enchanted by the pomp. But if you close your eyes and listen closely, you might still hear the modest clink of a spoon against a tin plate. And in that simple sound, that small echo, lives an entire story of hunger, dignity, survival, and, ultimately, humanity. The third-class menu didn't offer much, but it offered something many had forgotten. The feeling of having, even if just for a little while, a place at the table. You're on the deck now. The air is cold, but it doesn't bother you. It's a clean, calm cold, one that cradles the bones rather than disturbs them. Above you, the night sky feels even vaster, unhurried, unexplained. Stars scattered like breadcrumbs over a dark sheet. Below, third class sleeps, or pretends to sleep, or simply breathes slowly. The lights are dim. The last tea has been served. The steam has hushed. And, like an old house that still holds the smell of warm bread even after the kitchen has cooled, the entire ship seems suspended between the Last Supper and the next destination. You walk slowly. The floor creaks beneath your imaginary steps. Around you, quiet ghosts of past meals settle in. A plate on a table, a spoon forgotten in the corner, a bowl with soup remnants. Simple memories, yet solid. They make no sound, they simply remain. In the distance, a breeze carries something subtle, the scent of bread baking. There are no ovens running, but there is enough memory to recreate the aroma. It floats in the air like a warm longing, like the certainty that, at some moment, someone was hungry and was fed. You lean against the railing. The cold wood touches your fingers gently. There is nothing more to be done, only to be here. Only you, the ocean, and a ship, still afloat somewhere between history and dream. You think of all the spoons, of all the soups, of all the meals that will never be remade, but continue to be remembered. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a floating restaurant of unrecorded memories, a buffet of lives in transit, a dinner interrupted that still insists on continuing. Night after night, in museum displays, in poorly preserved pages, in the eyes of those who listen. And now, slowly, everything begins to fade. The sound of the sea becomes white noise. The smell of barley dissipates. The wood turns to mist. And the soup, at last, grows cold one final time. You close your eyes. The spoon rests. The plate is empty. But the story, is still warm. Good night.